Hello, a happy Tuesday to you, and welcome to our Tuesday Tea-ology today. You may hear it in my voice as I'm talking. I've got a bit of a cold going, but you know what's good for a head cold? A nice cup of tea. That's really Irish breakfast tea just soothes your system, Uh, so we will. Pardoning my scratchy voice, we'll go ahead and drink our tea and talk about the work of Christ. Particularly, we have come to the teaching of Christ, and we're attending to how his teaching it fits into the structure of his saving work. Uh, for for of course we're drawing connections between the birth of Christ and the miracles of Christ, and then his climactic work in his death and resurrection, where he made the atonement for sin, because we want to see how the whole fits. For Jesus did not just come and immediately go to the cross, and so we want to pay attention to this time of ministry. And part of that is that in his miracles, his exorcisms, he was doing in a microcosm what he had come to do on the grand scale, undoing the effects of the fall, undoing death and destruction, casting out the powers of darkness, defeating sin. So he was doing in a piece what he was going to do as a whole, and so it is connected. And in his teachings as well. One helpful framework that helps us see how this fits in is when we note the pattern of leadership in God's people, going back into the Old Testament. That the key leaders in God's people were in the three roles of the prophet, priest, and king. And this is a long-standing observation that fulfills these roles. That he is of course the true high priest. A priest is in essence an intercessor, someone who goes between man and God. And Jesus is the meeting of God and man. He is himself the temple. He is himself the perfect sacrifice, and he is himself the priest. He fulfills the role of king, as the one who rules over God's people and who fights for them and defends them. And so, especially in his healing miracles and in his exorcisms especially, we see Christ the King triumphing over the power of darkness, delivering his people. And in his teachings, we see him in this role as prophet. And prophecy is not necessarily about telling what is to come, although Jesus did that. Jesus told about what was to come, not only on the close scale, but also on the more distant scale. But prophecy at its core is telling God's message to the people. So it's been kind of pointed out, whereas a priest on some level can be seen more as going from the people towards God, the prophet goes from God towards the people there. And so the teaching of Jesus is his revealing work. He is revealing who God is and what is going to happen, and calling people then to respond. We need the revelation of God. For there is no point in there being a way of salvation if we don't know how to take it. There's no point in there being a road that leads us to freedom and hope if we don't know how to find it. And so Jesus not only made the way of salvation, is himself the way of salvation, but he revealed the way of salvation. And we began talking about Jesus' teaching and the message of the kingdom of God, the reign of God unfolding in the world. And so to unpack that a little bit today, uh, what is what is the content of this message of the kingdom of God beyond the basic claim that God is king and is establishing a people for himself? What does that begin to look like? If we go back to the Gospel of Matthew, because last time we were noting, particularly in the Gospel of Matthew, how this theme of the kingdom of God is immediately evident in the preaching of John the Baptist, in as a summary of the preaching of Christ. And in Matthew chapter 4, you see him going throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction among the people. And so that is there in summary. And then we begin to see, when we begin to see what Jesus teaching ministry, some of the content of it, it follows right on there. So we're in Matthew chapter 5. Just after that little summary bit that goes down and talks about where he went in the various places, we come to the Sermon on the Mount, famous Sermon on the Mount. And this is a message where Jesus begins with what are called the Beatitudes. And these are these are a way of saying, somehow we might summarize the message is that the message of the kingdom is counter to the ways of this world, that God's kingdom is different than this world and how things work in this world. And there is a reversal of expectations. And this is a theme you can see in the scriptures, but also relying on the power of God and closeness with him is ultimately of far greater importance than worldly success and prosperity, that reversal of expectations. And so we read in Matthew chapter 5, beginning in verse 2, "And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." And in those blessings, you can see the kingdom of heaven is referred to twice. In and a great reward in heaven is referred to once, and inheriting the earth is referred to once. So there is a strong emphasis on the coming reign of God and the blessings for the righteous in that coming place. But you can see here, these aren't the people who are commended are not necessarily the people who get ahead in this life. Poor in spirit, those who are humble, those who grieve, and so the suffering ones, those who are meek, those who are lowly, not the arrogant and self-important, those who pursue the ways of God and show mercy, which may be costly and certainly is counter to our natural desires for our own vindication. The peacemakers, and being a peacemaker often means being willing to suffer and being willing to put up with injustice rather than making sure you get adequate recompense. Persecuted for righteousness' sake. So these are not the groups that in the world's eyes would be called, oh, these are the blessed people. They're living what's their phrase? I think it's Joel Osteen, their best life now, you know. They're counting on their best life in the world to come. And that's the reversal of the kingdom, the reversal message, that the message of the kingdom is a message that involves faith. For you need to rely on the God who makes things right and who blesses with eternal blessings those who faithfully follow him in this short life, instead of trying to do everything we can to secure our blessedness in the here and now. Well, Jesus, his teaching, he goes on. He calls them to be salt and light in the world, and so to share the message and to show the kingdom of God, to lead others to the kingdom. He calls them to attend to the law. And they had the law of Moses, and Jesus has come to fulfill the law. And so, contrary to what his critics might be saying, he's not calling people to distance themselves from it, but rather he points them deeper. After Jesus says this, he says, "I haven't come to abolish the law or the prophets, but to fulfill them." Then he goes on, and in this sermon to challenge rather those who would keep the externals of the law, but not the heart of the matter. And that's where really he's going against those highly influential religious teachers of his own time, the Pharisees. They were famous for keeping the letter of the law, but in their behavior, especially their behavior towards Jesus, you see that their hearts don't have God's love and the desire to do what is right and good. They want to keep the letter of the law, but there is hatred and jealousy and so on inside them that works out in other ways. And so Jesus instead challenges people to attend to the actual spirit of the law. And he's not saying the spirit rather than the letter. It is in fact that the letter was always intended to be lived out by attending to the spirit of the law. And so he calls people not just to not act in anger, but not to harbor anger and hate their brother. He calls people not just to not act out your lust by committing adultery, but not to harbor lust in your heart. And he challenges them not to pursue divorce, even though there's a provision for it in the law, and to just keep their word instead of instead of having too much concerns about what oaths there. Whereas the law set limits on retaliation and said you can only go this far, Jesus challenged them instead to love their enemies and to not take revenge at all, but rather to bless others. And so in these ways too, the message of the kingdom is a message that reverses the world's expectations, for it pursues the deeper reality of the righteousness of God, which is a righteousness of the heart. And this can be hard. And that is why God's people are called to look for his blessings in the life to come, because really living out the calling of Christ requires self-sacrificial living, and it is challenging. But the other side is that surprisingly enough, it is only in the God-directed life that you find joy in this life as well. Not necessarily prosperity and ease and comfort and all of the things the world has to offer, but the actual joy of the heart is found in closeness with God. And so the kingdom of God is experienced even now by those who belong to Christ, who have placed their trust in him and who follow him. They know inside spiritually the joys of the kingdom, and they are promised to enjoy the fullness of the kingdom forever. when he comes and makes all things right. Well, enjoy the rest of your tea. Hope that you are well. May the Lord bless you as you go through your week.